behind the 5 secrets. And the law of opposite states that if someone criticizes you and says something to you that seems untrue or exaggerated or unfair or illogical, you'll have a tendency to defend yourself and to argue, as you did, Lynn, and as most of us do. And the law of opposite states is that if you defend yourself from a false criticism, you'll prove that it's a true criticism, and that's a paradox. And to say it once again, and you'll see this on stage, if someone attacks you and says something that's unfair and untrue, and you defend yourself, as most of us do on most occasions, the very fact that you defend yourself will prove that they're really right, and they'll believe even more in their criticism. And the opposite is also true. If you genuinely agree with a criticism that seems totally untrue and unfair, you'll immediately put the lie to it, and that's another paradox. Now, this is really hard to learn because, again, it involves the death of the ego. And we were even trained in therapy when patients criticize us, it's because of a distortion from their childhood. It's called transference. They're transferring onto you some distorted perception of how you are based on their traumatic upbringing. The disarming technique is exactly the opposite of that. It says when people are criticizing you, what they're saying is always true. There's always a grain of truth in it, and more often than not, there's a amount of Rock of Gibraltar or a Mount Everest of truth in it. And if you'll simply agree with them, it won't be true anymore. That's the paradox. People have a hard time learning this. It's really rough because it's so anti-intuitive. One of my residents, I was teaching some of the Stanford residents, and he said, well, how can you agree with a patient who says something that's totally untrue? And I said, I don't think a patient can say something that's totally untrue. All patient criticisms are true. I said, what is something that a patient has said to you that you would have trouble agreeing with? And he said, well, just this morning, we had this kid hospitalized on the involuntary unit. I guess some kid who was suicidal. And he was hospitalized against his will, and he was involved in a power struggle with the psychiatric resident. And the kid shouted out at the resident, "You're stupid." He said, now how could I agree with this? Now this resident has a PhD from MIT in electrical engineering and an MD from Stanford Medical School. And now he's in the residency program, so he's, clearly a high IQ guy. So he's saying, how can I agree with Jimmy, who's shouting at me, telling me I'm stupid? Now let me ask you a question. Is Jimmy right or wrong? Is that a true or false criticism? It's true, exactly. And what is Jimmy telling the resident that's actually true? You say, you're not understanding me, you're not helping me, you're not connecting with me. That's what he's saying, and that's really true. That is the truth in what he's saying. And if you defend yourself and argue with him, he'll be twice as convinced that you're stupid. So the resident said, well, how could I possibly agree with him? I said, that's just simple. You just say to him, Jimmy, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm feeling pretty damn stupid right now. You say, I'm like a prison warden, and I couldn't agree with you more. I don't like this either. I'm hospitalizing you against your will, and you're pissed off, and it's very painful for me either. I hate having to do this to you. And you have every right to be angry with me. And yet just this morning you were telling one of the nurses you were going to try to get out of here so you could commit suicide. And I really care about you. And if I let you out of here and you killed yourself today, I don't know if I could live with myself. But yes, Jimmy, you're right. I'm feeling pretty stupid. And I think we're on the same page. How's Jimmy going to feel if he hears that? Yeah, he'll feel heard. He'll say, this guy's not so stupid after all. See, Jimmy's probably doing that to all adults, pushing them away, hostile, making aggressive comments, and then everyone argues with him and gets defensive. He says, yeah, you really are stupid. You just proved my point. But you can see this in all of the examples that you folks provided as well. And it's a powerful tool to acknowledge the truth in what someone is saying But it's so painful for us, again, because of the death of the ego. We don't want to admit that we screwed up in that particular way. Thought empathy is something that we think we learned in graduate school. You're going to see that that's pretty tough to do, too. It's to